Hello guys, welcome to another video of Relab Academy. I do get questions as well about what's the difference between 3-day design sprint. Well, some people talk about 3-day design sprint, but the more popular ones are 4-day design sprints or 5-day design sprints or design sprints 2.0 or GV design sprints and stuff like that. I did a video about that as well and what the differences are. I'll make sure we drop a link down below in the description for you to have a look where I try to explain the differences between all of them. I just wanted to show you this time the different formats and how could a 5-day become a 4-day or a 3-day? Like, how is that even possible when the week is already so compact and so busy? So to do this, I wanted to use FigJam to explain it to you in the whiteboard. So let's get onto it. All right, guys. So as we can see here, this is the typical GV design sprint format, which is the 5-day design sprint. We've got day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here. Day 1 is typically about mapping and aligning the focus. Day 2 is where teams brainstorm, sketch ideas, and come up with solutions. Day 3 is about voting and deciding on the winning solution. And that's also when teams start to storyboard and create a blueprint of their product. Day 4 is prototyping. It's the prototyping mindset. We also add a time slot in day 4 where we trial the user testing session just to make sure that the prototype runs as intended, and we also know exactly how to run the testing. And day 5 is about user interview, which is the user testing session itself. I just don't like calling it user testing because we're not testing the user, but the user is testing. Anyway, you get the idea of all of that. So the user interview and the note-taking part happens on day 5, and next step plans is also when we lay it out on day 5. Now, most of you who have read the sprint book or familiar with the process in general would understand this, that this is the original design sprint methodology. Now, when we change it to 4-day design sprint or design sprint 2.0 as popularized by our friends at AGN Smart, 4-day design sprint is basically taking these 5 days and reformatting it to this format. So let me just do that real quick for you. So the difference is what you would normally have in day 2, brainstorm and ideation or sketching, is moved into day 1. So it just happens like that. And then you move everything else 1 day forward. So you're left with just the 4 days here. So you've got day 1, which now feels like it's going to be really compact. Normally though, what happens is in day 1, if we were going with the 5-day design sprint format, day 1 is probably the easiest to go through. And when we run it in Relab, if we start at about 9 o'clock in the morning, normally teams can actually finish day 1 at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the latest. So it's not too crazy. It's also when the participants still has the energy and they're really excited to get into this workshop. So day 1 is always like fun, easy. Day 2, day 3 is when people start to get tired, right? So it kind of makes sense if we combine day 2 and day 1 and bring some of the heavy lifting stuff that happens on day 2 into day 1. So the design sprint 2.0 or the 4-day design sprint essentially is combining day 1 and day 2 and jam-packing them all together like that. Now I'll get back to my position or my opinion around that in a second, but that's what the 4-day design sprint is. What's the difference then with the 3-day design sprint? So normally what happens in a 3-day design sprint is, I'll just copy this over and create this section over here. So now we have day 4 removed from our picture. Normally, 3-day design sprint isn't really a full design sprint where you have to do the mapping, the user journey mapping, the goal writing, and all of that stuff anymore. We at Relab use 3-day design sprint as an iteration sprint. So I will just write this down real quick over here. Iteration sprint. And that's the reason why we call it iteration sprint is because typically after running the full design sprint, whether it's a 5 or 4 day version, you would have some user feedbacks, or sometimes you would like to improve the product or refine it a little bit more before getting into production or deciding on something. That's what we do in the iteration sprint. And so what happens there is we find ourselves not doing the mapping session anymore, and not even doing the aligning focus sessions. So basically, again, getting rid of goals and questions, how might we, expert interviews, user journey focus and all of that stuff. Sorry, user journey map and all of that stuff. We don't need to do that anymore. That stays consistent with what we previously done the week before that. So basically, we're removing this component, and it starts with just the brainstorming, sketching, and bringing vote and decide as well as storyboarding down to day 1, which leaves you time for prototyping in day 2, and again doing a user interview in day 3. So that's what the 3-day design sprint is. Now, there's no set rules on how to do this or what's right or wrong. It really differs from cases by cases. There are parts where we feel like, okay, like we don't need to do the user interview anymore, so therefore let's not do this, but instead we'll have 2 days of finessing our prototype because we're quite confident. So it ends up being like that. Without the user testing, you just have 2 days of prototype and then still summarizing in the next step plan. So it's really up to teams on how to execute this, but generally I hope you get the idea that in a 5-day process that's what it looks like. In a 4-day process, we're moving stuff from day 2 into day 1, making it a really compact day, and then day 3 is removing some of the activities that we may not need anymore because we have already covered that and there's no need of redoing it again, that we only focus on certain activities to refine and iterate. My point of view in terms of when do we do which version is basically, let me just write this down for you so it's clear. So when to do the 4 or even the 3-day design sprint, because oftentimes the 5-day is always a challenge to get different people from different departments and stakeholders to join in, and different experts to join in for the 5-day, so that people appreciate it if we can do it, 4 days or 3 days. But when do we recommend the 3-day design sprint to actually happen? Number 1, I would say it's when participants are not design sprint rookies anymore. So by saying that, that means they have done this activity before, they know what to expect, they know what the design sprint is all about, they know what the challenges are out of it, that they know how to handle it. I would say that's when you go into a 4 or a 3-day design sprint. But if it's their first time ever, I would say give them a break and do a 5-day version, because that will give them some room to breathe and to understand and process things, because otherwise it'll be quite full on. The second point is probably when the facilitator is experienced. So experienced facilitator. When you have an experienced facilitator, they really know how to map out the agenda, which is not necessarily following the traditional structure, but they know who's included in the design sprint, what type of background and skill sets do they have, what type of designer, stitcher, prototyper do they have, and therefore they can map out the different activities throughout the different days. And so if you have an experienced facilitator, chances are you might be able to do 4 or 3-day design sprint, even though if the rest of the team is not as experienced, because he or she will be able to foresee the challenges and be able to point it out or flag it as soon as possible if it's feasible or not to run a 3 or 4-day design sprint. And the third and last that I've got here is probably that when the challenge that they're dealing with or the team is dealing with is less complex. So the less complex the challenge is, the less time you actually need to be able to run a design sprint. Let's say if you're focusing on only on a certain feature or a certain micro component of the product itself, you might be able to run 3-day design sprints instead of the 4 or 5 days because it's just less complex. There's less things to solve that you could buy a little bit more time to within a day rather than doing the whole thing. Okay, I'll leave it there. If you do have any questions, as usual, write down your questions in the comment and I'll answer them. And otherwise, I hope this is useful for you. And please be sure to subscribe as well if you enjoy these videos or if it has been helpful for you. I certainly do hope so. And otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. Thank you, guys.